So, I'll probably get a bit emotional when I talk about this, but far out, what it means so many things to so many people. I wouldn't have been quite good enough to play VFL football as it was then. I had good endurance, I could run all day, but I did lack a little bit of speed. Ended up playing, 250, 60 games.
263 games for Hobart, Sandy Bay and Devonport, 11 for Tasmania, 1980 Premiership with Hobart.
I'd read somewhere, you can coach when you can take a team that doesn't know how to win and teach them how to. I just decided I'd send a letter around to a few clubs. I obviously sent it to Melbourne. I got a call from Cameron Schwab, who was the CEO at the time, and said, we want to interview you for this job. I was a bit surprised. I was on the Ferris wheel at the Royal Hobart Show with my daughters. It was most intimidating.
Was it?
I was just this bloke from Tassie that liked coaching. It was an odd appointment, wasn't it? A 55-year-old who'd never played at the highest level. If I wasn't reasonably successful as coach pretty quickly, I might not be cut too much slack. Yeah, I was nervous about that. I didn't lose those doubts until we won the Premiership.
So the grand final itself?
There was just a hunger there. We're not going to lose it this year.
Well, footy fans are going to love this, and Tasmanians are going to love this as well, because this man, born in Tasmania, a wonderful football story. He's the reigning AFL Premiership coach from the Brisbane Lions. His name is Chris Fagan. He joins us on the Howie Games. Fages, great to see you. Appreciate your time, and thanks for coming in.
No, I'm looking forward to our chat, see where it takes us.
Well, there's going to be a lot of Tasmania in there. First thing, when you walk in here, so we're recording this at the start of February, and I don't say this lightly, you look tan, but you look fit and you look healthy. Is that still a tenant in your life? Because you're really looking good, Nick.
Oh, thanks, mate. I like to set an example to my players. I can't run that much anymore, but I do walk a lot. And I find walking very therapeutic in some ways and a good opportunity to think and come up with ideas, as well as make phone calls to people while I'm doing it. So doing two things at once. So, I try to look after the health. The tan's a little bit of a council worker's tan, to be honest, mate. I don't really go and lie out in the sun.
No,
the rest of the body looks pretty white.
Yeah, you don't. Typically, Tasmanians don't go out sunbaking. We're all getting older, and I try and stay fit and healthy. And I've just come after a long summer of cricket, and I try and look after myself. As you've aged, have you had a constant focus to look after yourself?
Yeah, I have. I think that's important. You only have one life, and you might as well have the best quality life that you can have, and you never know when you're not going to be with people anymore. So, no, I try to look after myself. I've always been active. I still swim a bit, which I enjoy 3 or 4 times a week, and the walking. And when I was younger, I played a lot of sports, obviously, footy, cricket. I was a swimmer for a while. Not a very good one, but a swimmer nevertheless. Played basketball in my hometown in Queenstown, so it's just been a way of life. Dad set a good example in that way and sort of kept going with it.
I would say typically our world-class swimmers don't come out of Tasmania, but then I think Ariane Tiedemann, and I think you've got to change that view now.
Yeah, Ariane, she's a star, isn't she?
Yeah, my word, she's a star.
What she's been able to do on the world stage and back it up. Actually, we had Dean Boxall, her coach, come out and speak to our players a couple of weeks ago, and then he came back with his swim squad on Friday night to watch us train.
What was his central message?
He had quite a few messages. He was big on high standards, hard work, which is the swimmer's ethos.
Yes.
I mean that's how it rolls in that sport. There's no substitute for it. So he talked about that. He talked a bit about the ability for his really good swimmers to back up, because we're interested in that, obviously, because we won last year. And, what does that look like? He talked a lot about just being humble and getting back to work and doubling down on the things that you're good at. You don't need to reinvent the wheel to go again. And I think that was a good theme to share with our players.
We'll start with the Premiership, then I'll circle all the way back there. Just 2 questions on it before we go back to Queenstown and Tasmania and the wild west of Tasmania. Once you've won the Premiership, how long do you give yourself after you walk off the dais to not think about football? How long before football crowds in you again?
Pretty quickly. I mean, the grand final finishes and the trade period begins. Now, we weren't active in the trade period other than we picked up Sam Day as a free agent. But, no, you're pretty much straight into it. you've got your exit interviews to do. So like that week after the grand final is pretty full. That you do your exit interviews, and then you've got the best and fairest night, and so a week goes really quickly. And then there's obviously the draft. So it doesn't stop that much. You do try and get away from it a little bit, but it's hard when you're the senior coach not to make yourself available for those who might really need you at some point in time. So yeah, that's the lie of the land.
And so, start of February now, how much are you thinking about football? Is it every waking moment, or no? Can you compartmentalise and put it to the side, or do you wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and think, right, we've got to replace Joe Danaher. This is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah. No, you got to try and compartmentalise, otherwise you burn yourself out.
Yep.
I mean, it's the footy season itself is such a full-on event from probably when you start playing practice matches, and if you go right to the end, it's 8 months and it's relentless. So you got to keep your energy for that. I'm really big as a coach. It's one of my strong philosophies is that in the footy club as a coach, I'm the chief energy officer, and I've got to make sure that there's plenty of that around the place, particularly when you travel every second week like we do. So I'm probably really good at setting that up for other people. I've got to get better at doing it for myself. Because it is an all-encompassing job, but I'm working hard at having good balance in my life. Because I think you make better decisions. You think clearer. You're easier to get along with if you're fresh.
Yes, no doubt. I like the term chief energy officer. Yeah. Of all the things that have happened post Premiership, give me an idea or tell me a story about the effect you've seen the Premiership have on someone that they've relayed to you, someone close to you, a fan you've met on the street where you've just thought, right, this is what a Premiership means. Yeah,
there's been so many stories for me. It's been unbelievable how suddenly everybody seems to know me. It's nice, but it's sort of intimidating too.
I bet, yeah.
But a couple of days after the grand final, I had the cup at home because I had to have it as a backdrop. I was on AFL 360, the couch, and they wanted the Premiership Cup in the background, so I had it at home. And the lady whose coffee shop I go to every morning, Zoe, she's a mad Brisbane Lions supporter and got all this memorabilia up at her shop. And I thought, I'll put the cup under a towel and I'll walk down the street and I'll pull it out when I
I love it
when I order my coffee. So I did that. I ordered my coffee and I said, oh, by the way, Zoe, would you like to have a look at the Premiership Cup? And she said, what? When? Where? I said, now. And I pulled it up from under the counter and she burst into tears. It was amazing. And you go, wow, that meant a lot to her, you know. And then, of course, there are other people in the shop. So for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I'm there doing selfies and signing autographs. I didn't really expect that outcome. But that cup, it does amazing things to people. Like, it's so iconic. People just love to see it and touch it and have a photo with it. And that's the thing that struck me. I mean, it meant a lot to the people of Brisbane. So, that was one example, but there's been plenty of others.
Did you take it down to Tassie?
I did. I only took it to Queenstown, which is my hometown.
This is a great way to introduce Queenstown.
Copper mining town on the west coast of Tasmania. Yeah.
And how is it received in Queenstown as a favourite son bringing it home?
Yeah, it was received really well. I mean, the reason I did it, I was very grateful for the first 15 years of my life living in that town, playing a lot of sport. It was a bigger town then. There was about 8,000 people living there. It's about 1,500 to 2,000 now, so it's changed dramatically. But as a kid, it was a great place to live, and I could play every sport that I wanted. I had really good coaches. My dad was a coach as well. And I just had fond memories of that place. And the thing about Queenstown is it's on the west coast of Tasmania, and it's sort of like the place where like no one wants to live, and not many things actually go to Queenstown, like, you know, a band or whatever.
So INXS aren't rolling into
No, they're
Queenstown.
not going to Queenstown, mate. And I just thought to myself, well, I would love to take the cup back there and take it there and take it nowhere else in Tassie, just so that people in Queenstown could say, we got to touch the Premiership Cup and we got to see it and nobody else did in Tasmania. So that'll make me really unpopular with the rest of Tasmania, but I love the fact that I was able to do that, and it did mean a lot to them. I mean, my old football coach from high school was there. Axel, Peter Alexander. Axel was his nickname. You don't reckon he was telling a few stories that day about how he made me into the person that I am. But, we did a clinic. Lots of kids turned up. There was a function at the Queenstown Crows club rooms afterwards. That was packed. I think they made plenty on the bar. So it was just good to put something back in and go back to my old hometown. I took Mum with me. She's 85. My brother, he drove the car from Hobart. It's a 4-hour trip, fair journey from Brisbane to Queenstown. But so my brother drove. My sister was in the car as well, and a mate of mine I went to uni with and did a teaching degree with. He came as well. He can talk, so we didn't have to really talk too much on the way around. He did it for us, David Lewis. He was on Fitzroy's list for a little while, but they all came around. So it was great to do it with the family. It meant a fair bit to them, and it meant a lot to the people of Queenstown.
What did it mean to your mum for you to achieve the ultimate success, do you reckon?
It would have meant a lot. So, I'll probably get a bit emotional when I talk about this, but, my parents, when I finished high school, if I wanted to go on and do any further education, I had to move to Hobart.
Yep.
So I was going to do that, but I was going to go and live at a hostel and board and do my year 11 and 12 because you couldn't do that in Queenstown, and then go to uni and become a teacher. And Mum and Dad decided that they didn't want the family to split up, so everyone moved to Hobart, which was at a fair bit of expense because Queenstown was a relatively cheap place to own a house, and Hobart was the capital city, so things were a lot more expensive. And Dad, who's not with us any longer, he did 2 or 3 jobs, a full-time job and some part-time jobs, and Mum full-time nursing just to make ends meet and to send us kids to school and do all those sorts of things. And I look back on that and I think to myself, well, if they hadn't have made that sacrifice, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about being a premiership coach. So I'm acutely aware of that. I wish Dad could have been there, but he's not with us anymore. But the fact that Mum could be there and could be out on the ground and feel the buzz at her age, and she's 85, but if you met her, you'd swear she's about 65. She's got all this energy. But I'm sure it meant a lot to her, and it certainly meant a lot to me.
So she's the chief energy officer as well, is she?
Yeah, she's a fiery person. You wouldn't want to stand at the football with her, mate. Especially if they did anything to one of her sons. So that's how she rolls.
So footy in Queenstown. So we're talking, for those that don't really follow geography, Western Tasmania, east of Strahan.
Yep.
But famous for its mining and therefore famous for a football ground that doesn't have grass on it. So just explain to me a bit about the mining and why the footy ground is like that. It's the famed gravel oval of Queenstown.
Yeah, it was quite iconic around Australia.
It really is.
Most people talk about it because it's the only one of its type. The background to it is it's a high rainfall area, Queenstown, and so turf turned into mud pretty quickly in the football season. So I don't know who to give credit to this for, but back in the day someone decided that gravel was a way better surface if it rained a lot than turf was, which is true. The water just drains straight off. The ground stays relatively dry no matter how much it's raining. So that became the surface, and just for good measure they put a cement bike track around the outside, which was the boundary line. Just to toughen you up a little bit more, because I used to have the professional carnivals around there, and the bike riders used to come around. I think it's not there anymore. They've removed that, which was one of the changes that I noticed. But it had a cement bike track then. It had 4 football clubs operating out of the one ground. So, training nights, there was a roster for training. One team would train at one end and the other team would train at the other, so you only got half the ground, so no full ground drills. And then so like might be 2 teams turn on a Monday night, then the next 2 teams on the Tuesday night, and so it went through the week.
Well, no, you couldn't have turf. She'd be just a mud pit,
it would have been, yeah. So it was highly used.
So who did you play for?
I played for Lyle Gormanston.
Right.
So there was a team called Lyle and a team called Gormanston, and right towards the end of my time at high school, the population dropped a bit and we went from 4 football teams to 2. So there was some amalgamations. And my dad coached Gormanston.
So your dad was he was
Lyle.
a football person?
Yeah, he was. He's an electrician in the mine, but he was a footy person, Austin.
Right.
So he coached and played for Gormanston. He also coached Lyle. So
when you were growing up, was he coaching?
He was coaching. I was really young, so I couldn't remember a lot when he coached Gormanston. I remember when he coached Lyle. he didn't do that for very long. He just did that to sort of help out because they were in a bit of a spot, I think, from memory.
Would you have been
and
in
he
the
even
rooms?
played. I think he was 40 and he played.
Right.
I'd never seen him play. I went and watched him play. It was very disappointing at the age of 40. Howie. Apparently, he was a really good player, but he wasn't. He didn't get much of the ball that day.
Right.
But he was a good man and a good coach, and a little bit ahead of his time in a sense that, we often had players down at our house for dinner and all that sort of stuff. So he looked after his players in a really holistic way. Compared to some of the coaches back in those days who just turned up, swore at you for 5 minutes and told you to go out and play, he was different. So that was the role model that I had. He was much loved around the town. He wrote the article in the Advocate newspaper every week on Western Tasmanian football. So
the summary.
Yeah, no, he wrote like the lead up to the weekend.
Right.
All the predictions and write a story about it. And I used to read them. Like he had this little notebook and he'd write it out, and it would be 8 or 9 pages, and I'd just read through it every week. And I just was born into a football family, and he had a great love for the game and sort of passed it on to myself and my brothers.
Was there VFL on the telly?
Yeah, sort of probably by the time late 60s. So I was born in 61. I can certainly remember watching the grand final in 70 with Collingwood and Carlton, was it?
Yeah.
Is that the one where Carlton were well in front?
The 44
Collingwood were well in
pointer.
front, and Teddy Hopkins did some magic and
handball.
I can remember watching that in black and white.
Okay. Did you have a team? Did you have a hero or not?
Yeah, I was big on Richmond. I didn't have a choice. Dad was Richmond, so we were Richmond. But fortunately, it was a really good time to barrack for Richmond.
Yes.
In the 60s and 70s, and so we had our Tasmanian hero in Royce Hart, Paul Sproul, who ended up being my coach at Sandy Bay when he came back from his VFL playing days. So very much a Richmond man, and flags in 67, 69, 74, 75 was a
happy days.
Pretty good time to follow the Tigers.
So when you're growing up, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you're starting to play footy. What is the style of play you're taught to play in Tasmania? Because I'll get to a couple of the grand finals you played in. I had a look at a couple of videos and we'll get to where it ended up. But I presume it was a hard style of footy, Fags?
Yeah, it tended to be because the grounds were quite small. There weren't too many large open spaces to play on, other than probably Boyer Oval up at New Norfolk was like double the size of everything else, and a distinct home ground advantage to the local team. But most of the grounds are pretty small. Like North Hobart's a very, very, very small oval. So the football was physical. It was probably more of a yardage game than anything else. Get the ball, kick it forward, and then run on and try and get it again. As I said, I had Paul Sproul as a coach, so he introduced a lot of Tommy Hafey stuff from his Richmond days, which is pretty much that way of playing as well. That was more what the game was like then. It was more one-on-one matchups and not so much tactics and strategies. There might be a bit of tagging going on, which was code for belting the other person in that day. It sort of wasn't.
Which we'll get to.
Polite. It wasn't polite tagging. It was getting bashed.
I've got a grand final I need to ask you about. So you, as a footballer, you showed promise. Did you have that thought? Right, I'll go across to the big leagues.
Yeah, look, you sort of always dreamt of that. It was a little harder in those days because there wasn't a draft. I think teams had Form 4s or whatever they called them, and they only had a couple of those. So if you're an interstate player, it was a little bit more difficult. So I was able to play Teal Cup for Tassie, and I made my senior debut when I was 16. I went across and had a pracky game with Essendon.
Tell me about that.
Well, that was a pretty scary experience to a degree.
So how old
intimidating in a way. I would have been 17.
So you get on a plane?
You get on a plane, get picked up by somebody you don't know. They take you to a hotel room. You stay there. You're all on your own. Someone picks you up the next morning. You go to the game, get an introduction to all the players. I remember Justin Madden was playing for Essendon in this particular game.
Okay.
And I think Ken Fletcher was the coach.
Right.
Dustin's
dad.
Yeah. So you just get put in the team. You don't know anyone's name.
Hey, mate. Oi, knackers.
So I played. I didn't play very well. Actually, someone hit me in the head early in that game. And I can remember seeing stars. It was way in the days before we knew about concussion. But
what position were you?
I was a rover.
Okay, rover. On ball.
Yeah, on baller and small forward.
Yep.
I could play both those. So they did ask me to come over and play under-19s, but that was a pretty big move for a kid from Tassie just to come over and play under-19s. I was just about to start a teaching degree, and so I said no, to be honest. And I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have been quite good enough to play VFL football as it was then, because I didn't have enough speed. I had good endurance. I could run all day, but I did lack a little bit of speed. So it maybe would have found me out at a higher level, but ended up playing, 250, 60 games in the
263 games for Hobart, Sandy Bay and Devonport, 11 for Tasmania, 1980 Premiership with Hobart, which quarters 1 and 2 are on YouTube. I don't know if you've gone and looked back at it. There's a bloke, what's his name? He's number 26. It sounds like they're calling him Cordo.
Paul Corto.
Right.
He's a full forward.
They're just kicking long, or you're kicking long to him, and he's just taking big marks. The commentators are saying at one place, this is not a place for weak hearts because it was on, but you win that. But the one I want to ask you about, Devonport Blues versus Glenorchy in 1988. Yeah. So there's a bit of this grand final, including the first 7 minutes, Fags, which is just a 7-minute all-in.
Yeah, it was.
This is hard man's football.
Yeah, back in the day, they used to have the band come onto the ground to play the national anthem.
Yep.
And so the bands played the national anthem and they're marching off and the fight had already started. So the umpires hadn't bounced the ball. It was just on.
So before the start of the game?
Yeah. And
wow.
I think the next year they didn't have the band. They just played it over the PA system. That was a natural progression. But, it was an interesting game because they had a very talented team, Glenorchy. I remember Adrian Fletcher, who's Jasper's dad, played in that game. Robert Gronewegan of Western Bulldogs fame, he was the captain coach. And they had a really good team, Glenorchy, and we had a great team as well. I think there'd been some discussion in the Glenorchy camp that they were going to come out and rough us up.
Yep.
And I remember our coach, Roland Crosby, who comes from Shepparton way, we had a really old, experienced team and a lot of tough guys. And it was a bit of a mistake by Glenorchy to say that, but that was the word. Well, that was the word he told us was the word. He might have been making that up just to rile everybody up. But he
psychological ploy.
He did say to us, "Well, we've heard this, boys. If they come out and the minute they try something, just give it to them." So it was a powder keg of a game, mate. It was going to explode at the start, and it did. A lot of guys got injured in those first few minutes. We ended up winning, which was good. There was a fantastic bus trip back to Devonport. Took a very long time to get to Devonport.
Well, a northern team won as well.
Yeah,
and still in Tasmania, there's the north and the south.
The north and the south rivalry. You know, Glenorchy's as southern team as you can get. The Magpies, and have been a great team in the competition for many, many years. So, yeah, it was great. It was Devonport's first win in the statewide league. It was only the second year of the statewide league. And yes, it was celebrated long and hard. So long and hard, in fact, that we weren't a very good team the next year because I think we're still celebrating.
Well, the wash-up. So I read this. There's 6 players reported.
Yep.
15 charges. 5 blokes were outed for a total of 18 weeks. Now, I was happy to see you didn't get reported. However, L. Lockley got reported for striking you not once but twice, and Kay Wilson, who was on your team, struck the Glenorchy runner, F. Clark. So you got told. Right. Who was L. Lockley? What was he doing to you?
Lyndon Lockley. He just gave me I was going for a mark and he just sort of came from the front and just punched me in the face. But I got him off at the tribunal.
You got him off?
Yeah, right. Yeah. We had to go back to Devonport. We had the celebrations. Then we had to come down on the Monday night for the tribunal. So everybody's still been celebrating. So that tribunal hearing didn't make a lot of sense. I wouldn't have envied the job of the tribunal panel, and there was quite a bit of laughter in the room outside waiting because you play the game, you play it hard, and then everybody's okay with each other afterwards. But yeah, I managed to get him off. He didn't hit me that hard. So
Glenorchy coach Robert Gronewegan, who you mentioned, was gracious in defeat, saying, I quote, "We lost the fight and we lost the football match." Pretty good summation, mate.
Oh well, that was what it was like back in the day, mate. Like it was funny. Like the home and away sort of season was sort of pretty calm and not much of that stuff went on. But it was almost like the rules were in the grand final that there were no rules, and that nearly always happened. That sort of, especially early in the first quarter, there seemed to be a brawl.
And a question for you, and I understand you're answering this as a current coach and a Brisbane coach, you've seen the development of footy in Tasmania and coaching the Mariners and coaching local football down there. What do you think the introduction of the Tasmanian Devils will mean come round one for Tasmania and its people? I've just come from seeing the Hurricanes and the sellout there and Mitch Owen and a local boy. Like, what will it be if they produce a gunful forward who lights up and he's a Tasmanian boy?
Yeah. Look, I think it's much needed and much overdue. I've never been really able to understand why haven't been able to have a team until this point in time. It seemed logical. It's a traditional football state, but for probably more economic reasons, it's been shelved many times in the past. I'm so glad it's going to go forward. I think footy needed that injection down there.
I agree.
I know that North Melbourne and Hawthorn go there and play their games, but the boys in that town need to feel like they're close to playing AFL football. And if you've got a team in the town, in the state, then it's reachable. It feels like it is. And I'm sure the popularity of the game, even though it's still quite good, will grow even more just because there's a team down there. The local lads will want to play in that team. And it'll take a little while because everybody's got their favourite AFL team and they're pretty rusted on in Tassie. But I think it's like the Jack Jumpers. It's like the Hurricanes. Once it gets up and going and there's some signs of success, then I think it'll be massively popular in Tasmania. Not only good for sport and young people in the community, but great for the economy. And if they do get to build a new stadium, and we've seen what that's done around the country, you go to Adelaide Oval now and how many people go to the football there and enjoy the rest of South Australia and Adelaide post that.
Same in Perth.
I'm sure that's going to happen in Tassie. So I hope that they embrace it. I know there's a lot of social issues down there and people are concerned about money being spent on sport. But I think the boost that will give the self-esteem of Tasmania and Tasmanians will outweigh that.
Yeah, you and I are not politicians, and I have a lot of family in Tassie, as I was saying to you before. I think there's been such a drain on Tasmania that the youth leave Tasmania. I think anything to keep people engaged in the community, and I understand people want money spent on health and hospitals. I get that, but as you say, you go to Adelaide or Perth now, and the connection with the community and what that teams and those stadiums have done for the city, I think can only be a wonderful thing for Tasmania.
Oh, it's got to be. Like, I know myself, like I couldn't have gotten a chance in the AFL if I didn't move.
Yep.
And I would much have preferred to have stayed in my state and worked at the team. That would have been so much easier for my wife and I and our young kids. But if you wanted to get involved, you had to move. And that's been the case for all Tasmanians for a long time, whether you be a player or a coach, an administrator or whatever you are. So it just seems fair. It just seems right. It's that's how I feel about it. I'm probably more emotional about it than I am practical, and people will probably give you another argument as to why it shouldn't happen, but I can't see why not. Cricket's done it. Basketball's done it. It's fully embraced.
There's a uniting factor in sport that maybe goes past economics, but I do understand the other side of it. 1993, your first senior gig coaching Sandy Bay. Yeah. So you roll up to the first training. What's your idea in your head about how you're going to approach life as a senior coach at that stage?
Yeah, well, they were the bottom team in the competition.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it is a little bit. I went to Melbourne, they were the bottom. The Mariners started at the bottom. And
Brisbane
started at the bottom. Yeah, I've never actually thought about that, but now you've said it. So Sandy Bay was my old team. I did have the opportunity to coach North Hobart when Mark Yates left because I'd been there as his assistant coach and the fitness coach. And I remember being interviewed for the job, and the president there at the time said to me, well, if we make you coach, will you make this bloke captain? And started trying to do deals with me. And I said... Oh,
before you got the job?
Yeah, so I said, no, look, I don't want to coach the team if you're going to make me do things that you want. So thanks, but no thanks. And my old team, Sandy Bay, were looking for a team, and they're down the bottom of the ladder. And I think I'd read somewhere where you can coach when you can take a team that doesn't know how to win and teach them how to. So I don't know why that was ringing in my ears, but that was oddly enough, the attraction to do the job. And so I went for that role and was able to get it. It was a pretty tough gig. The club had struggled for a while, and we sort of had to build from the ground up. We started with local boys in the first year, and then in my second year we started to recruit a few players from elsewhere and just got jobs for them. One of the guys, I remember his name, Marcus Wallach. I was teaching at Dominic College at the time, and I talked the principal there into giving him a job at Dominic College because he just finished his teaching degree.
Right.
So, he got his start in his career, and we got another bloke by the name of Rick Brodie from Shepparton who just finished his accounting degree at university over here, and we got him a job in the best accounting firm in Hobart. The club didn't have much money, but it was well connected.
Yeah.
So we sort of built our stocks that way. And in my second year, we got to a prelim final and just got knocked out. And then, so it was really just a matter of building confidence, playing the younger players, having a clear game plan, making the place a good place to come to. Not too much different to what I've done at Brisbane, to be honest. We got going, and then the Tassie Mariners became a reality, and the opportunity to go for a job that allowed you to work full-time in footy popped up, and so I went for that job, and I was lucky enough to get it. So I was living the dream, working full-time in footy, and I was I'm a teacher by trade, and I love teaching, so coaching's teaching in my view.
What'd you teach?
I was a primary school teacher.
Right.
But it's sort of, coaching is teaching and knowing a bit about our sport. So the skills I learned at uni and I honed as a teacher still help me to this very day.
You mentioned you had to leave your state to pursue your career. Yeah. There's all sorts of urban legends in football. One is that you wrote letters to clubs. Is that a true story?
Yeah, not to all clubs. Like at that time, and because I coached the Tassie Mariners, I actually had built good connections with a lot of AFL clubs because the recruiters want to know about your players and all that sort of stuff. So, I just decided I'd send a letter around to a few clubs. I can't remember how many it was. It wasn't all of them.
What was the gist of the letter?
Just express my interest in any positions that might come up that were related to player development, reserves coaching, for instance. And that was around that time that clubs were starting to appoint those sorts of people. And so I obviously sent it to Melbourne, and Neil Danaher had just started, just been appointed as coach of the Demons, and so I got a call from Cameron Schwab, who was the CEO at the time, and said, we want to interview you for this job. And I was a bit surprised. I was on the Ferris wheel at the Royal Hobart Show with my daughters, and I said to my wife, I've just got invited to go over and go for a job interview for Melbourne Footy Club. So I went over. It was most intimidating.
Was it?
Oh, it was for me because, I wasn't playing AFL footy. I was just this bloke from Tassie that liked coaching, and I was pretty surprised to be there. I felt like I didn't do a very good job in the interview.
Who interviewed you, Cameron or Neil? Or?
Cameron Schwab, Neil Danaher. I reckon Greg Hutchison was there as well.
Okay, so heavy hitters of the...
Yeah. And I went in and I thought of all the good things to say when I walked out. I was that nervous.
We've all been there.
And anyway, I went back and I just thought, it was a good experience. I'll be better equipped if that ever happens again, and sort of probably resigned myself to the fact that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And 2 or 3 days later, Neil rings me and he goes, we want you to come back over for a second interview, and you better have a talk to your wife because there's a pretty fair chance you're going to get this job. And I was very surprised by that, excited, but very surprised. And my wife was very surprised, and she was very anxious about the idea of moving to Melbourne and wasn't very sure whether she wanted to do that or not. And I said, well, I'm going for the interview. I want to do this, and I really love it if you'd come with me. so
we're going.
No, but anyway, it worked out well. She loved the move after a little while. It was big. We had young kids, and all our family was in Hobart, so the children could be looked after and could see their grandparents and all those sorts of things. A little bit harder when we moved to Melbourne, but we made the move. Not being very sure how long it would last. Ursula was a teacher as well, so met her at university. So, we made the move and coached the D's reserves for the first couple of years, and then went on to be an assistant coach and ended up GM of footy at the club across 10 years. So
I'm going to sidetrack you very briefly. What was it, personal question, what was it about Ursula? You meet Ursula, what was it about Ursula that you were like, oh?
We went to university together. She was in my year doing teaching degree. We didn't really get together until right towards the end, And I didn't know her very well at all, and I don't think she liked me that much. I think she just thought I was one of those blokes doing a phys ed, bit of a jock, and all that sort of stuff. And there was a party on one weekend, and she'd just broken up with a boyfriend.
Oh.
And I was with a couple of mates fishing during the week.
Yep.
And they were having a bit of a chat about this fact and how they were going to try their luck at this bee party the following Saturday night. And so me, being a good mate, decided I was just going to run interference on it for the whole course of the party. It was a bee party. I should have known better. She went dressed as a bride. I swaggered in with it, dressed up as a boxer, with the silks on and a dressing gown.
Top off?
Yeah.
Love it, Fages.
And anyway, I ran my interference and thought, oh, she's not a bad girl. And, we just stayed together. We've been together for 40 years. She's got good intellect. She's not a footy head. She's right into the arts, but she's also a wonderful mum and a great support to me. So, it was really good to be able to share grand final day with her out on the Oval and in the rooms afterwards.
I bet it was.
Yeah, because it was, that was the sum of 40 years of being together, that in many ways. And she sort of knew how important that was to me. So, she's a beauty.
Tell me there's a photo somewhere of you dressed as the boxer.
Oh, someone might have one, but I do not have it. It's quite embarrassing to actually say, but when you're a young bloke, the ego can get carried away.
Absolutely.
Get carried away with ego.
So you go to Melbourne and you say you're the reserves coach, and not that you would have any inkling of this at the time, but you are under the now newly crowned Australian of the Year in Neil. So, and you went down the slide famously. I think you hurt yourself on the slide. You did your hammy.
Ripped the hammy off the bone.
Yeah, ripped the hammy off the bone. What does Neil mean in your world?
Oh, he means a lot. Like, first of all, he took a punt on a no-name from Tasmania, which was a pretty brave move by him, and gave me an opportunity. And, I can't be – I'm grateful for that to start with. But then he spent a lot of time developing me and showing confidence in me and giving me more responsibilities year after year, to the point where, I had a 10-year career at Melbourne. When I must admit, when I first went over there, I didn't sell the house in Hobart because I thought fair chance I might get the sack, and they send me back.
So it was there as a safety, the house still?
Yeah, the house was still there. In the end, I was able to sell it, but and start a life up in Melbourne. But, yeah, that's what he did, and typical of him. It was a courageous decision. It wouldn't have been one that the board would have understood at the club, but they backed him in, and he gave me a job, and then I coached the reserves, and then he said, I think Melbourne Reserves then became part of Sandringham Footy Club when there was all that amalgamation stuff going on with the AFL Reserves, and I wondered what was going to happen to my role, and he said, I want you to be an assistant coach now. So he made me assistant coach of the back line, and I said, mate, I'm a bit worried about this job. He said, why is that? I said, I never played in the back line in my life. He goes, oh, you'll work it out. He just had that faith in me, and he told me many times that I was his right-hand man and the person he would go to. So that made me feel good, and made me feel more attached and loyal to him. So I coached the backs for a while. I coached the forwards for a while, and then Danny Corcoran, who was our footy manager, left us. I think he went to Athletics Australia.
Oh, of course,
and Neil came to me and said, I want you to be the footy manager. I've got to have somebody in there I know and trust. And I said, I don't want to be a footy manager. I don't know the first thing about that role, He goes, no, it'll be really good for you. So in the end, he persuaded me. And the last 3 or 4 years at the D's, I was GM of footy. I stayed there until we did 10 years together, but he resigned with a few weeks to go in my 10th year. I'd been approached by Hawthorn the year before to go there in a role with Clarko, who I met in my early days at Melbourne. He was the team runner and pest. So I'd said no to that role. I knew Neil was in the last year of his contract, but I was hoping that he would keep going, and I was loyal to him because he gave me a job. I wasn't moving until such times that he wasn't there anymore. So, yeah, it finished up, and I thought, gee whiz, maybe I should have taken that job at Hawthorn. And they rang me a couple of days after Neil resigned and said that they hadn't filled that position, and it was still there for me if I wanted to come. So I was lucky in that regard. But the years at Melbourne were wonderful. We've had a strong friendship for obviously a long, long time. It was a bloody sad day when he rang me and told me that he had MND. I had really no idea what MND was, and then I looked it up and thought, that's not good.
You remember him ringing you?
Yeah, I do. I was working at Hawthorn at the time, so I got something to tell you. He told me, he goes, that's the last we're going to talk about it. Let's just get on with things. That was his motto. Even then, I did have a little inkling. I'd spoken to him on the phone a couple of times that year, and his speech was a little bit sort of just dragging a little bit, and I thought, it was almost like he'd had a few too many beers, and it didn't really make any sense. And then obviously found out what it was, and I've tried to be with him and help him ever since. We always catch up at least once a year, if not twice. It's interesting now chatting to him through the computer, but it's still a chat.
So how does that?
He basically interviews me. He interviews me, mate. He sort of
does. How does the process work?
Well, it's eye recognition on his computer. So
amazing.
He
technology.
spells out words, and the computer will ask me a question, and then I'll answer.
Is it footy questions or life questions?
Both.
Yep.
Yeah. Because with MND, I mean, he's still got a very, very clear mind. It's just it attacks the body. So he's as sharp as he's always been. One of the best bits of advice he ever gave me, he said, Fages, you've got to remember, as an AFL coach, you've got to be a great actor sometimes. Good words of advice.
Yeah. So you go to Hawthorn,
yeah,
and externally, tremendous success. You're involved in multiple premierships. Alistair coaches 4 premierships at the club. The external media narrative was that you had the ability to keep Alistair in check. Now, I don't really know what that means. What does that, like? You've grinned at that. How do you see the relationship? Because whatever it was, it provided stability, and for a highly successful club, took it to an even greater level of success.
Yeah. It's difficult to know. We're different personalities, and we get on well. He's feisty and fierce and intelligent, and can get emotional, and could be impatient. And I'm probably a little bit the opposite to that. So in a sense, people might say that, but I think it was just that our two personalities worked pretty well together. Like, he'd come in with a good idea, and I'd go, do you want to sleep on that one? And he'd straight away know I didn't think that was a very good idea. But we had respect for each other, and I think he pulled me a little bit closer to the way he was, and I pulled him a little bit closer to the way that I was, and together we were a good team. That's sort of how I see it. I mean, sometimes Hodgie would come to me, be a bit angry about the coach, and can you go and talk to him about that? And I go, why don't you go and talk to him yourself, Hodgie? But I just had the relationship with him, and I could talk to him about everything. And sometimes those discussions were hard discussions. They weren't always easy, but there was mutual respect there, and I think that just helped us through our time at Hawthorn and was a really good combination.
And the success you all enjoyed together, it was a very successful team, but it was an exciting team. As a Hawthorn supporter, there was, there was rock stars on every line in that team. They played an attractive brand of football. How do you reflect on the success you all had together? Yeah,
look, it was obviously a super playing group, and they had strong leaders in that team. Probably the Premiership in 2008, which was my first year at the Hawks, was a little bit probably unexpected. And when you look at the scoreline and you see how inaccurate Geelong were, we're probably somewhat fortunate, but we took our moments in that game and kicked straight and therefore won.
Stewie G.
Yeah.
Mark Williams.
Yeah. But the real learning for Hawthorn, I think, took place post that. There was probably everyone got a bit ahead of themselves after that flag. Didn't turn up in great shape for pre-season. Didn't make finals the next year. Sort of got back in and got knocked out in the first week in 10. 11, Collingwood got us in the prelim late. And then we lost the 12 grand final. But there was so much learning taking place that what happened in the next 3 years was really I think a sum of all the experience that had happened post that 2008 grand final, and the fact that the guys like Luke Hodge and Lewis and Cyril and all those guys that were pretty young men in that first final had been around for 4 or 5 more years, and it meant a lot to them. And I think the fact that they were able to go a three-peat was really, again, on the back of winning in 08 and then not making finals in 2009. No, they just couldn't stop talking about that. Boys, don't fall for the same mistake. We've got to come back fit. We've got to come back ready. We're good enough to keep going, and so the motivation was there. So they were just a super group of players, well led by Hodge and Mitchell and co. We had some really smart coaches there. Obviously, Clarko leading the ship. But when you have a look at who was there during that time, Adam Simpson, Premiership coach. Luke Beveridge, Premiership coach. Brett Ratton was there. Brendan Bolton was there. Damien Hardwick was there for the one in 08. There are a lot of strong coaches that came out of that program, and so you could just tell just from that the players were well serviced by a really great and committed group of coaches. The club was a very calm club. It was well administered. Good CEOs. Had Andrew Russell as the fitness guy, who was absolutely fantastic, and we were just a really cohesive club. And I learnt so much in my time there about what greatness looks like, and
what does it look like?
Well, it's some of those things that I just spoke about. It's an inner confidence, but not an arrogance. It's a humbleness in a way. It's keeping people to high standards. It's having a trademark that's clearly identifiable in the way that the players played and the way they conducted themselves, and the whole club did. It's many things like that, and it's a bit of luck too, but we're always good enough to take the luck when it came our way. And I think one of the other things is that player ownership was pretty huge at Hawthorn. Whilst Clarko was on the surface could look like an old-fashioned style of coach, it's my way or the highway, but he embraced leadership groups, and he embraced listening to his players, and he embraced listening to his staff, and he embraced, personal and professional development. It couldn't be a more shining example of that than what he was during that time. And so the whole club was just always trying to get better. And I think that's the essence of it all.
You go up to Brisbane, Fages, appointed on the 4th of October 2016. Looking back, you might not be able to answer this. I probably need to ask the people that interviewed you, but why do you think they gave you the job?
I don't know. I was a little bit of a reluctant applicant to begin with, and because I just thought, maybe they're just trying to get a good list of applicants together to make the whole process look like it was, thorough. And,
well, you think you thought you maybe a bit of a stocking filler,
maybe. Right. I mean, I'd seen that happen.
Yep, happens a lot.
Yeah, so I did say to Greg Swan when he rang me. He asked me whether I was a coach or a footy manager. I said, I'm a footy manager, but in my heart I'm a coach, but I've sort of given up on that idea that could ever happen. So, and he said that they were pretty keen to chat to me, and we were still in the finals at Hawthorn, and I thought I'll test him out a little bit here. I'll just say, I can't come and talk to you next week. I've got to wait until I see what happens with Hawthorn's final series, so you might have to wait for a little while, thinking that, if he's not that keen on me, he'd cut it off there. But he sort of said, no, we'll wait. And I thought, maybe they're serious. So I thought I'd better get to work and start putting my application together. Why they picked me? You probably have to ask the people that selected, but my gut feel would be they wanted somebody at the time who they felt could unite the club, that could bring some positivity back into the place, someone who could develop players.
Chief Energy Officer.
Chief Energy Officer, yes, what I appointed myself as. My application was really about building a culture more than it was about what the game plan was going to look like, because I knew that we had to fix the off-field stuff before anything could happen on the field. it was just a club that it was in a bit of chaos, and I'm not speaking ill of the people that there before me. That's what it had evolved to, and they can tell their story. But that's what I found. You know, there are a lot of nervous people at Brisbane who were, you know, worried about their jobs, worried about their position in the team. They didn't enjoy coming to work every day. That's what I found out. So I think the fact that in my application I talked about how you build a culture, because I'd seen it and been a part of it at Hawthorn and at Melbourne with Neil, that I ticked that box. Maybe one of the things that I did that might have been a little bit different is I actually had a plan for the first 3 months of everything that I was going to try and accomplish in that period of time under a number of different headings. I got that out of a book that Karen Hayes, who was on the board at Melbourne, told me to read when I went from Melbourne to Hawthorn. It was a book called The First 90 Days.
First 90 Days.
And it was a book about how you sort of it's a book about how when you go to a new place, don't assume it's going to be the same as your old place, and you're going to have to find a way to build your own way into it. Don't wait for somebody else to do it for you. So I read that book and I thought, she's right. And Hawthorn was very different to Melbourne, and the strategies in that book really helped me. So I applied it to the Brisbane situation. So I had a plan for my first 90 days, which I implemented, and I always really think the start's the most important part of any job, how you start. And so I was big on that. I was big on wanting to hold people accountable. So the first thing I did at the club was I told them my life story, which was quite a long story when you're 55. Probably bored them to death, but I told them the good parts and the bad parts. I told them what I stood for. I told them what I believed in as a coach and what I was going to stand for as a coach. And I did all that at the start because I knew I had to hold them accountable, and I couldn't hold them accountable unless they could hold me to account. So thus I did that first. And I think in hindsight that was a really good thing to do. But yeah, I think they were the main reasons. I mean, I don't know what people were saying about me. They would obviously be ringing people up and asking questions. It was an odd appointment, wasn't it? A 55-year-old who'd never played at the highest level. And
how did you go with that? Because it turns out you become the third coach to win a premiership that's never played in the league. So it's a path less travelled.
Yeah.
Did you have to rail against he hasn't played at the highest level, or is that it's going to be outdated now because, as you know, AFL follows trends. Everyone looks at the previous premier.
No, I felt that myself. I thought that if I wasn't reasonably successful as coach pretty quickly, then I might not be cut too much slack. So,
well, you don't have the legend status to fall back on, do you? You don't have the Lee Matthews or the Nathan Buckley or Michael Voss.
No, and probably if the truth be known, I was lucky enough to get the job because I'd been at Hawthorn through a successful era.
Yep.
So, I was nervous about that. And
so how's that going? Like you take over, they finish 17th, 3-19. Your first year, 18th, 5-17. Your second year, 15th, 5-17. Are you having doubts at the end of 18?
I thought that in my third year, the team was already improving in my second year, to be honest.
So you could see...
It was a much better 5-win season than the one the year before was. The first year was 5 wins, and that was bloody lucky, I reckon. But,
right.
The second year, that 5 could easily have been 10. We were close in a lot of games, so I knew we were getting better. I think our percentage was just under 100. That always tells you. But I knew that I felt like in the third year we had to win a lot. We probably had to win 10 games.
For your security?
I think so.
Yep.
And that's fair enough to the club too as well. It's a business at the end of the day. But I've had those doubts all the way through. And to be honest with you, I didn't lose those doubts until we won the Premiership a few months ago.
Have you lost them now?
Yeah, I feel like I've ticked that box and...
Proof's in the pudding.
Yeah, you can't beat that. But, yeah, just little doubts. The team improved so much and we're thereabouts for 5 years. We went from bottom to second in my third year and we've been thereabouts. And I sort of always wondered in the back of my mind, is there something missing inside of me that's I'm not going to be able to get this group to a flag? In my quiet moments, I ask myself that question.
A couple of lost prelims, a lost semi.
All that, Am I the right bloke? I know this group's talented. Can I help them get there?
And what did you come up with in your mind when you asked yourself those questions?
Oh, well, I just felt like we continued to improve. So
you're still on the upward.
We hadn't gone backwards. And, we sort of got to our first grand final and lost it by 4 points or whatever it was. And then we get to our second grand final and we're able to win it. And I could see even through our history in finals, the first three years we won 1 and lost 5. So thus the question marks about my ability to coach on the biggest stage. But the last 3 years we've played in 10 and won 8.
Yeah.
And we lost 1 by less than a goal. So not that far away from, maybe going back to back. So that's given me a bit of confidence and a bit of belief in my philosophies. They do actually work. And when I went there, I was playing the long game. I mean, Brisbane were a million miles away from winning the flag in 2017. So we just had to do it step by step, player by player.
How do you keep the confidence in the playing group that they're heading in the right direction during those couple of years when there's, as you say, there's a good win, 5-win season and not such a good win. How do you keep the players invested that they're heading in the right direction? Because they're in it for 10 years maybe if they have a good career, and there's other clubs knocking on the door and they see their mates go here, there and everywhere and have success.
Yeah. I talked about being the coach, being the chief energy officer.
Yeah.
You've also got to be the chief storyteller. And I don't mean telling stories that are not true. I just mean using the available facts and showing the boys that they're actually getting better even though the wins are not coming. So we had a system called marginal gains, which is not unique to me. It's Sir Dave Brailsford with the British cycling team. Mm-hmm. That was his fundamental philosophy, that if you take 5 things and you try and get 1-2% better at those things, you'll get decent improvement. And that's what we were trying to do. So I'll give you an example of that. Contested ball. You can't be any good as an AFL team unless you're good at contested ball. You don't have to be the best, but you've got to be good. And Brisbane have been 18th for years on end. And so we were measuring our contested ball, and I was showing them a line graph every week, what's happening, whether it's going up, is it going down. And so we did that for the first year. I think we were minus 243 contested ball versus our opponents for that season. The next year, we cut that in half, right? And I'll put the graphs up, and the boys, you could see them. Yeah, we're getting better. And it wasn't the only area that I was looking at, but this is just an example.
Yep.
Our third year, guess what? We got above the line and we're in the positive. And then we started to become a good team.
And you're a very good team at this stage.
Yes. So I've always been I always feel like there's a lot of talk about in AFL footy, a lot of narrative, and there's a lot of stories that get told about your club that not always based on facts, just on people's opinions. And I've always felt like I've got to be the bloke that's telling the right story. And that's the role I've played from day one. And, Zorks and Harris Andrews and those blokes who were around when I first started telling the story, they love it now because it's an entirely different story.
Yeah.
But it's always been factually based on whether it be on statistics or what we're seeing or whatever. Because I think if you try to fake it to make it, you don't make it. So I've always tried to be openly honest about where we stood as a team, but also show the boys when we're improving.
A couple of difficult moments. You mentioned the grand final. You lost by 4 points to Collingwood. This for you personally. You can talk about the team, but for you personally, this is a 40-year journey to get to this point. You're in front with X minutes to go.
About 5 minutes on the clock, I think, mate.
Like, yeah.
Charlie kicked the goal and put us in front.
Yeah, so like you can remember it clearly. How does one overcome? Like, it's in our game, rightly or wrongly, there's one winner and 17 losers. Yeah. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know.
Right. It's wrong, but it's right.
Yeah, it is. I think it is wrong. Like, you look at the way they celebrate a winning season in the States. You walk out of the coaching box, you got to do the presser. When do you have a moment away from the players or your wife and you just sit down and go, oh, shit, we were one straight kick away from achieving, at that point, a 7-year journey?
Yeah. I woke up most mornings thinking about that and the what-ifs and the maybes. But, I mean, one of the big things I've pushed it the Lions since I've been there is the idea of a growth mindset, and that is that fundamentally that's just that you learn from your mistakes. You try your hardest, get some feedback, try again a little bit better the next time, fundamentally. And so that grand final, even though I was disappointed, I treated it the same way as we were when we were a 5-win team.
Can't be easy to do, though.
And so we watched the grand final and talked about...
As a group?
Yep, and talked about moments that we regretted, and the players were incredibly honest. There wasn't anyone in there kidding themselves. They took full responsibility for some of the mistakes that happened, and we didn't make too many mistakes. We weren't too far off winning it, but we still made some. And the idea was to learn from it and try and come back a better version of ourselves next year. So we watched it. They all filled in a sheet, which they had to fill it in from an individual perspective, what they learned from the finals, what they learned from the grand final, and from a team perspective, what they learned from the finals and what they learned from the grand final. That was an idea from Anthony Clarica, our sports psych. I took the sheets back. I said, if we make the finals again next year, I'm pulling these out. We're just going to remind ourselves of what we learned. And luckily enough, we made finals again. There were moments this year last season where I thought we weren't going to get there, but we did, and we pulled that out. And a lot of the boys said to me that was just a really powerful thing to do and put them back there in that moment, and was really motivational coming into finals. Because for me, that review of that grand final loss, it wasn't a harsh review. There weren't recriminations. They went out there and tried their hardest, just came up a little bit short. So for me, it was all about, I think sometimes when you lose a grand final, it's like worse than finishing on the bottom of the ladder, and sometimes you can overreact. My thoughts were not to overreact, just treat it the same as what we've done all the way through. What can we learn? How can we get better if we get back there next time? So that's what we did, and it worked out. We've been doing that method for 8 years. I thought, if I'm going to fail, I'll fail doing my method.
I love the fact it was all written down. So before we get to last season, up to you what detail you do or don't want to go into the effect the Hawthorn situation with the racism allegations had on you personally.
Yeah.
Is it right to ask you about that?
Yeah, you can ask me about that. It was a great shock when it came out, because that's not my memory of Hawthorn. So that was the first reaction.
What's it like when your name is on the front page of the paper tied to something so hurtful and so negative?
Yeah. And people who know me know that I couldn't be that sort of person.
But 99.9% of the population don't know you, so they're just reading what they're reading.
So they're reading that. So, yeah, it was, to be honest, the first couple of weeks when the story came out, I stayed at home in my apartment at Brisbane.
Yep.
I love my exercise, so I was waiting until it got dark and I'd go out afterwards, because I wasn't sure how I was going to be greeted and treated by people. So there was apprehension about that, because that whole thing was like a new situation for me. I didn't expect to ever encounter anything like that in my life, but suddenly it was there. After a while, I thought, I can't keep living this way. This is not going to work. So I got out and about. And to be honest with you, mate, not one person in the last 2 years has ever said an unkind word to me about that. I think people who know me know my character, and they know that the things I and others were accused of, I couldn't possibly be like that. So I gradually gathered confidence from it, even though the process was elongated. I mean, it's gone on for 2 years. It sort of reached a bit of a conclusion just before Christmas there. But the thing I was most concerned about, the effect it was having on my wife, her having to answer questions as well, and her feelings about it, my family, my mother, who, dear old thing, she's 86 years of age, but she's, her one contact with the world is the media. Mm-hmm. So she sees stories about her son. She's making phone calls to me. You can't believe a lot of the things that you're hearing here. It's one side of our story. So it was challenging, but I had great backing from the footy club. Lee Matthews was an absolute star through the period. Like, he said publicly many times how well he knew me, and that's not me. I wouldn't be like that. And that gave me a bit of confidence, but it was always there lurking in the background. I mean, to be honest, I've massive respect for the lawyers that I had, and they were great to work with. I'd never needed a lawyer in my life other than to do my will. And maybe to sign up for a couple of houses I might have bought. But
did you address it with the playing group? Did you feel a need to do that?
Yeah, I did. Because what was happening was they were out of concern, could come into my office and ask me how I was going. And it was sort of becoming a bit overwhelming. And in the end, I just said to them, I said to the whole group one morning before training, I said, look, I really appreciate what you're trying to do here. It's bloody heartwarming, and I appreciate it. But I think it's hard on you if you feel like you've got to come in and keep asking me questions about it. I said, so what we'll do, I said, if I need to talk to you about it or I need to tell you something, I will. But otherwise assume everything's okay. And that's what we all agreed to. And I had really magnificent support from Anthony Corrie, who was our Indigenous liaison officer in the club, and all our Indigenous players. They got around me, which is really nice. And a lot of other Indigenous people have done as well. So it's it's hard for them to do it publicly, because if they come out and spoke against their own people, then that's not culturally right for them. So it was more private, and that was really nice. And even a lot of the Indigenous boys that played at Hawthorn were the same, and even some Indigenous people I didn't know, would stop me in the street. So I sort of had this really nice support around me. It was a bit surprising, some of it, but it helped me get through that year last year. It was harder. It was probably harder last year than this year, although early this year was hard because we had to go to the Human Rights Commission hearing here. It was in late March.
Is your head spinning, like walking into the Human Rights Commission?
Yeah, well, I didn't know what was going to happen. As it turned out for me, the people that actually work in the Human Rights Commission were really good, but I felt like I personally got nowhere that day. I couldn't talk. I didn't get to talk to anyone that I wanted to talk to, because that's just how the process went. I can't really go into the details, but I walked away from there a bit frustrated. It had been going for a year and 3 or 4 months, and still I hadn't been able to really talk to anyone or tell my side of things. And I still to this day never have and never will. But that was a bit frustrating, because you just want to, if you know you're innocent, it's really hard to not be able to get up and defend yourself. But it all gets tied up in legalities and processes and things like that. But
from the outside looking in and reading about it, I'm ignorant to what occurred, obviously, but there seemed to be a real disconnect between people that were closely involved being able to have a conversation with each other. That's externally the way I read it. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what happens with lawyers at 10 paces.
Yeah, that is what happens. It's unfortunate. I would have loved to have got into a room and had a chat to the people involved, maybe to understand where they were coming from and why they thought that, not to have a go at them or anything like that. But that wasn't to be. So it's in the back. It was sort of, it was a weight on my mind, because you just never quite know what's going to happen.
A heavy weight.
In these emotive sort of issues, which this is.
So what was the toughest point?
There wasn't a moment when I wasn't checking, because I set up my special email account, so anything that came from my lawyers, I had to read so many documents and things over the course of those 2 years that I just developed this habit where I would look in there 5 times a day, every day. It was always on my mind.
To see what was coming.
Yeah, to see if there'd been any development, waiting in hope that it could be resolved. It was... I wouldn't recommend it.
No.
It's not a good way to live your life and be coaching an AFL team at the same time.
Which is what you're doing. So added to that, again, football is. I was talking about this with someone the other day, a fitness coach. I was saying that a media gets a narrative. So if at the moment the narrative is St Kilda's got injuries, so if any bloke just nicks his calf, it's back page news. Where if it happens in Brisbane, that's not an injury concern, so that's not the narrative. So the narrative was that Brisbane had got beat by 4 points, and then the season starts with 3 losses after that start against Carlton. I think I was there that day when you're miles in front. You're 40-odd points at half-time. I only remember because my wife's a Carlton supporter, and she told me she turned the telly off, and then was. But you're 2-5 at the turn. I think you're 13th. So I'm trying to ask a question and taking far too long to do it. But the narrative was Brisbane has got as close as they could get. They're on the downward slide, and the other narrative that came in, and it's the first time I'd heard this, was that Chris Fagan is a wonderful teacher and coach of men, but tactically he's got beat by 4 points. So it's hard to fathom, but tactically he's not as astute as the other coaches, and he's been beaten in the coaching box.
Yep.
Plus you're going on with human rights commissions and stuff like this. So how are you dealing with all this, Fags? As the chief excitement officer. I sort of perhaps understood why people were saying that. Do you think there's truth to it? Do you think you were being out-coached?
No, I don't. I sort of knew, for the last 6 years, we've won more games of football than any other team. So I look at that and I go, I must be okay tactically.
But that's the narrative. That's what I'm talking about, the narrative.
I know. And it's probably, I'm a soft target in that regard, though. I suppose where it comes in, well, I didn't play AFL footy, right?
Correct.
So that's an easy thing to say. I'm old. So, he's too old. He's out of date. They're easy things to say. And they were said. And I understand why. But, again, I just I just took myself back to the facts. We played in the last 5 final series, and as it's turned out, we've now played in 6. We've been getting better every year. Statistically, we were travelling way better than our ladder position indicated that we should have been. So, a lot of our issues weren't supply to the forward line or any of those sort of common things. It was more we're getting in there plenty of times, but we were kicking terribly inaccurately, and we were dropping marks and not completing plays. And bottom line is I just felt like the players were trying too damn hard after losing the grand final last year. There was no evidence around the club of them being slack or, not putting in the effort. There was none of that. So I just had to deal with what I saw every day and what the numbers said.
Did you continue to have faith in yourself and the way you're doing it?
Yeah, so I just doubled down on what we knew we were good at, and thought our way out was to try and be a better version of ourselves than we were in the first half of the year. And it was good to have the mid-season break. We got beaten by. We started to get going a little bit, and then when Hawthorn got us in the game before the bye, it just gave everyone a chance to take a deep breath. I remembered the fun I had watching Ted Lasso, so I showed a Ted Lasso episode.
I believe. One of the great shows. Which episode?
When episode 1, series 2, when Danny Rojas got the yips.
Danny Rojas! A great episode. Danny Rojas!
So,
football is life. Life is football.
That was it. That was the episode. So I just wanted to lighten the place up a bit. It just felt heavy, and that I felt I had to liven them up. And, if we're going to fail, boys, let's fail having some fun and enjoying ourselves again, because to me, accuracy is a bit of a reflection of anxiety and putting pressure on yourself when you're having a shot on goal. And there were some other signs of that as well. So tried to lighten the load, showed them the Danny Rojas episode, talked about this, if you're walking on thin ice, you might as well dance. That resonated for some reason or other. I think we won 9 in a row. Then we hit a little bit of a roadblock just before the finals, but we got ourselves back into calculations. I think we got ourselves back into the top 4.
Yeah.
That was it at the time. It was a hard year. I mean, there were times when I thought, I kept asking myself the question, are you the bloke, Fags?
Did you?
Yeah, absolutely I did.
How close did you get to the point? No, this is not, told you, this is not clickbait or headlines, but did you get to the point where you thought, shit, maybe not?
I I suppose we played the Gold Coast Suns in a game at the Gabba, and that was after we had that bad loss to the Giants, and I had the Hawthorn thing going on. I had the disappointment of losing the grand final, the team struggling a bit, and I had a little bit of a health scare at that time. You know, the thing most males don't want, passing blood in their urine, and you wonder what the hell's going on. So I think I had a bit of health anxiety, to be fair to say.
She got a bit on your plate then?
Yeah, so there was a bit on the plate. Phil Smythe, my good friend and mentor.
From the Adelaide...
The General.
Right, the General.
Yeah, he's been with us for 5 years.
Right.
A bit of a mentor of mine. We went for a walk the morning before the Gold Coast game. I said, mate, I think I'm going to have a rest for a while after this game. I just don't feel right. I just feel knackered, you know. And anyway, we went to that game. I'd definitely made up my mind that I was going to ask for at least a rest for a few weeks.
So not step down, step away.
Yeah, for a little bit, just to try and get myself right. That was a game where we lost Starcevic in the warm-up. We lost Noah Answorth in the first quarter with concussion. We lost Darcy Gardner with an ACL and Lincoln McCarthy with an ACL.
Geez, you had some knees,
and I'll be
you?
totally honest with you, mate. I was standing there on the sidelines and I thought, this is not the day to pull the old I need a rest card out.
Right.
So anyway, somehow we won that game.
Wow.
I don't know how we won it. It was one of the, I'll probably put it as outside the grand final, the greatest win that we've ever had.
Well, you were decimated, weren't you?
We were decimated. And, you know, that was the day Logan Morris made his debut and he'd already played in the reserves, a full game.
Oh, with the Macca's stop on the way. The much talked about.
So, yeah, I was at that was a low point. The next day, unbeknownst to me, Smythe, who knew about it, and the club doctor, Paul McConnell, knew about it too. They must have spoken to Danny Daly and Swanee and Andrew Wellington, our president, and I get a knock on the door. We played on a Sunday night. It was a public holiday in Brisbane on the Monday. They lobbed at my door and said they wanted to see me, so they came in to see me and they wanted to know how I was going, and I told them the truth. I told them how I was feeling, and it was funny. And this is a little bit of a thing about men's health. When I shared it with them, I actually felt better about what was bothering me, and it made me feel like they understood and that I could keep going.
There's a lesson there for everyone.
Yeah, because you sort of, I don't know, when you're in a leadership position, it can be a bit lonely at times, and you tend to think to yourself, I've got to be the brave bloke here, and I can't let anyone see that I'm struggling too. But it was actually it was a really good meeting, and they said, what do you want to do? You can have as much time off as you like. We're okay with that. And I said, no, I've had this discussion now. I actually feel a bit better about things, so I'm going to try and keep going. So I'm glad I kept going. It ended up being great, but that's the honest truth. That's as it occurred.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
44 points down versus the Giants. Looks like you cooked. You mentioned watching Carlton Collingwood and the Barassi and the Hopkins and the famous handball game. Was there a stirring coaching address? Was there a Ted Lasso moment, or did the players just click?
No, we just reinforced the themes that we'd been on the whole time. You know, the boys we're really on thin ice here, so
real thin ice. So keep dancing.
We've got no choice but to try and get ourselves back into the game, but we don't need to do it in a hurry. We just got to be somewhere near back in the game by three-quarter time. And I also mentioned the fact that, you know, the Giants had a big lead over the Swans in that final too and weren't able to complete the job. So I did mention that. More trying to give them hope than anything else. We made some moves at half-time. Lockie was getting pretty heavily tagged. They were stopping our kicking game pretty well. So funnily enough, we talked about handballing more and running the lines a little bit more. We injected Will Ashcroft into the midfield more than he had been playing in there previously, and he made a difference. Zorks, they'd sat on Zorks and was sort of stopping his influence. So we said, if you're going to get tagged, mate, you just might as well run wherever you want. They're going to come with you. I think he kicked a couple of goals as a halfback flanker. I think he was in the forward pocket for one of them.
I love Dane Zorko.
We just took a bit of a punt on a few things, remained optimistic. I mean, we'd had plenty of lessons of that throughout the season. It's not like it hadn't happened to us in previous weeks. It had. So, yeah, it all turned out well. We got some momentum in that last quarter. Joey did some Joey magic. He was clearly not wanting to retire at that point. He wanted to have a couple more games. So, yeah, we ended up winning the game by 5 points. I mean, everyone talks about that comeback. We actually had 5 more shots than the Giants in that game as well. But it was remarkable. It was a remarkable game to be involved with. I think I got a bit excited at the end and went over and revved up the crowd. But I was so grateful to that crowd for there. They made a lot of noise that night, and it felt more like a Brisbane home game than it did a Giants home game. And so we lived to tell the tale for another week.
You talked about revving up the crowd, and you said you got to be carried away as a sports fan, though, not as a commentator too. That's what I love. I love to see the passion explode.
I couldn't stop myself, to be honest.
But why would you? Like it's a defining moment.
Yeah, and I sort of wanted to. I was mindful of the fact that we'd had 2 really good wins, and I just wanted to keep building that momentum as well. And I wanted the boys to understand the fans loved them, but also I wanted the fans to understand we love them, and we wanted to recognise that they helped us on that night, which is hard when you're on the road. But yeah, Joe's
story is one for Joe to tell. Actually,
you should get him in.
Well, I've asked.
Will he come in and talk?
No, not in a.
He's modest.
Yeah. Joe. The group that I'm involved with, TGI, Ben Danaher works there, and he said, "Listen, I'll have a word to Joe." And he went and had a word to Joe, and Joe just basically replied, "No, I'm just happy to sail off into the sunset." Yeah. So I'm not sure whether Joe will ever tell his story. So you can tell it from your perspective. When did you find out? Because it broke just before the grand final, which I presume is the last thing a bloody footy club and a coach wants going into the biggest game of the year.
Well, I was out having dinner with my wife the night before the grand final because we came down on the Wednesday, so we were just trying to treat it as a normal home game. So I'd met Ursula in the city, and she pointed it out to me that it had got to the social media platforms. And
did you have any idea?
Yeah, I knew.
You knew.
To be honest, so the truth is about Joey. We caught up after the Collingwood grand final the year before, and he said to me, if we had a won on the weekend, I was probably going to retire. And I went, okay. So what are you going to do?
You know, there's a T-shirt of him with his picture kicking a goal. I got a mate that wears it, and it's just got the enigma written across the top, and that is an enigmatic thing to say to the coach.
But at least it was him being honest, and I don't have a problem with that. I'd rather know than not know. And he was, in his defence, he was just giving me fair warning that he was going to go, and we probably need to find someone to replace him in 12 months' time.
Good luck doing that too, by the way.
And so anyway, we had a good discussion. He said, "Oh no, I want to go on because we got that close. I feel like we can get there next year, and I want to be a part of it. But if it doesn't happen next year, then that's it." And so, other than I said, "Can I talk to our list manager about that because I don't want him to be blindsided," and he was okay with that idea. So it was pretty good effort that it didn't get out until just before the grand final.
Now that you've told me that, it's amazing. Yeah. And then she dropped up on Friday night.
I don't know how it came out, but anyway, you never find out about how these things get out. And
did the playing group know?
No. I think they might have had an inkling. Okay. They certainly appeared to have had a very big inkling when he kicked that goal late in the grand final. So
they
maybe,
all went to him.
I don't know whether he said something out on the ground or I have not asked them. Although some of the boys said to me that they weren't surprised that they got that feeling. So maybe it was in and amongst the group. But, he every now and then during the season, he'd come up to me at training and go, "You haven't forgotten, have you?"
Just reminding you.
In that dry Danaher sense of humour way. I said, "No, Joey, I haven't forgotten. I'm hoping you might change your mind, mate, but no, I haven't forgotten." And so after we won the grand final and I rang his dad and I said, "Anthony," I said, "do you reckon we're any chance of talking Joey out of this, you know?" And Anthony said, "Well, mate, maybe if you just give him a bit of time, he might come around, you know." I don't know whether that was Anthony hoping or Anthony knowing, but anyway, I took his advice and Joey knocked on my door on the Thursday after the grand final. He goes, you know what I'm here for, don't you?
Straight to it.
Yeah, and I said, yep. I said, but do you need to make the decision today, mate?
So let's just put it off a week, can we? Ever hopeful, ever optimistic.
I said, because you might wake up in 3 weeks' time and think differently about that. And I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he said to me, mate, he said, I'm 30 years of age. He said, I was pretty keen to give it away when I was 20.
Right.
And I said, and I thought to myself, gee, he's gone 10 years longer than he wanted to. It must have been hard.
Well, he went through the whole Essendon thing,
He did,
didn't he?
and I think that's what it all sort of comes back to. That must have been pretty traumatic for all the guys that were involved there. And I think Joey probably being the only sort of the Danaher progeny, is it?
Yep, it is.
That ended up playing AFL footy, that there was a lot of pressure on him at Essendon, and I was really keen for him when he came to Brisbane just to enjoy playing the game, because he loves the game, right? He loves the game. Doesn't like all the other stuff that goes with it, but he loves playing. And I know that, there were some pundits out there that would be critical of me because I didn't appear to discipline Joey too much, and we do some of those crazy things that only Joey could do, but that's just Joey. And it wouldn't matter how you coached him, he'd still do those things. So we'd always have a bit of fun with it. I'd go after a game, hey, Joey, what were you thinking when you did that? And he'd tell me, and we'd have a laugh. But you know what? That bloke, he produced big time in the big games.
Well,
and I knew
he
that he could do that. So when he came in and told me that he wasn't going to change his mind and he didn't want to take any more time, I completely understood. I was incredibly grateful for what he brought to our club, and I wish him all the best in whatever he does in his life. And he'll always be welcome at our football club, and I'm so glad for him that he got to play in a flag. And that moment where he kicked that goal and he jumped up in very unusual Joe Danaher style, because he's usually the under celebrator. I thought that was a great moment, and I knew then that it was over. To be honest, I knew I was going to ask the question later in the week, but I knew then it was over. And what a way to go out, eh? You can only dream of that.
And in many ways, in the world of modern professional sport, to go out on top as a winner and turn your back on, I don't know, $1 million a year. There's something beautiful about that we don't see in sport in 2025, because it's such a professional, money-driven caper.
No, there is that. It's a bit like Ash Barty when she won the Australian Open.
Yeah.
And she said, that's it.
I'm done.
Yeah. I love that about Joey. I mean, I'd still love to have him played at our club, but geez, you can't begrudge him.
No. So the grand final itself, I went back and watched highlights of it last night. What's like the last time you speak to the players? Give me and you've been so good with your time. Give me an idea of what you say to them.
Yeah. So the little message before we went out was more based around Oscar McInerney, the guy who would have been in the team that couldn't be because he dislocated his shoulder the previous week. But
so how did you use him as?
But he'd been so brave because he dislocated his shoulder and went off, and then got it strapped off and came back on and played another 50 minutes for us. And the story goes that we played Collingwood late in the season and they beat us late. We were in front all day and they got us a few muck-ups at stoppages, and
as Collingwood did,
and things like that. And we had a meeting on the Monday where we reviewed the game, and in that game we had some players who tried to do a few things on their own. And I wouldn't say they were being selfish, but I'd say that they made the wrong decision and they should have given the ball to a teammate in a better position. And we were looking at the vision of that. And Oscar, who doesn't say much in a meeting, said, boys, if we're going to win it, and we can win it, he goes, you got to give yourself to the team. You just got to give yourself to the team. Now, Oscar says, bugger all in team meetings. And it was like one of these big, you'd have to be an insider to understand it, but it was one of those big moments. Shit, Oscar just said that, If he's saying it, we need to do it because, he's a real good teammate. And then in that final against Geelong when he got injured, he came on and played even though he knew if he did it again, he probably wasn't going to be playing in the grand final if we were lucky enough to win the prelim. He still did it. So it was the ultimate sacrifice yourself for the team act. So in a funny sort of a way, he helped us massively win that flag because of the example that he set. I think the name Oscar stands for brave warrior in Irish.
Does it?
Yeah. So I use that as well. some teacher friend of mine had let me know that was the case in the week leading up to the grand final. So I thought, maybe I can weave that in somehow. But I just talked about his act and the fact that he said what he said after that Collingwood game, and that if we went out and played with the spirit that he showed last week and that he always shows, then we'd be in pretty good shape.
One of my favourites, because he's an entertainer, your man Kai Lohmann. Now, if I said to you Kai Lohmann's going to have 2 in a space of a minute, he's going to have 3 at half time, and then you go in, you play sublime football on the biggest stage in that second quarter. So the halftime address, is it, we're only halfway there, keep a lid on it, we're playing well, like what, you're touching distance now.
Yeah, we'll just double down. We thought we did everything that we should have done against Swans in the first half, and we just doubled down on trying to do that again. We'd been, dare I say it, that's the sort of lead we had against Carlton in the first round.
Yep.
And so we're able to go back to that game and say, listen, we've been in this position before, boys. We know that teams can come back from here. There's a long time to play. We just need to make sure we win this quarter. And we don't need to win it by much. We just need to win it. As it turned out, we extended our lead and we got to 70-odd points in front. But I think, again, like, if I'd have said that at half-time in the Carlton game, I probably wouldn't have listened. But because we'd been through that experience, they listened. And it was like there was no way that they were going to let anything untoward happen in that third quarter that was going to put the game in jeopardy. So we just doubled down on all the things that we're doing in that first half, and the leaders stood up. Lockie Neal and Josh Dunkley and Harris, Ryan Lester. They were just brilliant. They led the way, and there was just a hunger there that we're not going to lose it this year, and that's the way we played.
And at what point did you allow yourself in the coaching box? Do you turn and wink at someone, or like when you have the realisation, actually, we're going to win this? How far into the game?
Yeah, so I was down on the bench. I'm not in the coaching box.
Of course,
But I don't know. I didn't even realise we were 70-odd points in front at three-quarter time, because I went out and sort of, we've got to keep going, boys.
Right.
Because in reality, the game was over.
They could kick the next 13 in a row here, lads.
Yeah, that's just how you are as a coach. You're wound up, right? So you're not really comfortable until there's about 10 minutes to go. But if I was to be 100% truthful, when I watched the replay, there was a goal that Cal Archie kicked when there was a turnover in the middle of the ground, the ball got over the back and he ran onto the loose ball.
He's streaking into the open goal.
When I was watching the grand final back, that's the moment I got emotional, and then I realised we've got the game here, because when you get those sorts of goals, when you get pressure in the middle of the ground, you turn over and you get a running goal at the other end, that's a spirit lifter for you, and that's a spirit killer for the opposition. So I reckon if there was a moment, it was that moment late in the third quarter when Cal kicked that goal.
And after a 40-year journey and everything you've talked about, like what was your defining moment in your mind? I talked about asking you someone you've met, and you told a great story about the cafe and the Premiership Cup, but was there a moment that in the rooms, talking to the players, walking out of the ground, where whether it sunk in, whether you thought, right, we've done it, and what it means to you?
Yeah, it was probably it was more when the siren went, and Danny Daly, who's been at the club the whole time I've been there and has been a great friend of mine and a great helper, and I was a coach when I first started there and the footy manager. It was when he came down and we had a bit of a hug, because he'd been through all the hard times more than what I had, and I know how much it meant to him. And I looked at Jess, the one of our footy analysts who sits next to me on the bench and takes notes for me, so I've got things to talk about at the breaks. I looked at her, and she'd been at the club for longer than I'd been there, and she had tears coming out of her eyes. It's like, far out, what it means so many things to so many people. But that moment then, there was the Lee Matthews moment as well, because Lee had been such a great supporter of mine and had always believed in me, and he just repeated that in my ear as we had a hug, and I blubbered up. But it was probably those moments immediately after, but it was seeing people who had sacrificed even before I'd got there, to see the looks on their faces and how much they enjoyed it. That to me is what premierships are all about. It's all the stories. So, and there were plenty more, on the field as well, and getting Zorks up to accept the cup with the other two captains because I thought he deserved that. All those sorts of moments. It's hard to have a favourite, but it's the seeing others, I think, for me. Yeah.
You've taken us through a wonderful footy journey, Fags, and an unconventional route, I think it would be fair to say.
Yeah, probably.
That you obviously doubted yourself at various times. So we always finish this podcast the same way, that we're privileged to have a lot of young people listen to this podcast. And there's so many lessons in it for them that you don't have to follow the typical path. I think that's what I'm taking away from listening to what you've been saying. But what advice would you pass on to those youngsters? Doesn't matter what field they want to excel in. You've excelled in yours over a long period of time. What advice would you give to those youngsters that were hoping to achieve success in their world? Yeah,
so it's probably about resilience and perseverance. I was lucky enough to visit the San Antonio Spurs back in 2012 with Clarko when I was still at Hawthorn. And then when you walk into their organisation, there's a big boulder sitting in a display case with a sledgehammer, and there's a poem on it called The Stonecutter's Credo. And it talks about the fact that the stonecutter belts away at the rock, and on the 101st blow, the rock splits open, but he understands that it wasn't that blow that broke the rock, that it was all the blows that went before it. So that's a poem about resilience, I think, and you just keep trying and not giving up, and eventually things might come your way. They won't always, but it's a better way to live than to give up and to not keep trying. So, at the age of 55, I got to coach an AFL team, and blow me down at the age of 63, I got to be an AFL Premiership coach. So hopefully that's a good lesson.
Mate, you've had the Sonos headphones on your head throughout the entire podcast. They support this show. It's not a Premiership Cup, but they are yours to take away. Mate. So whack those on your head for the next time you're on a plane flying to a game of footy. But more than that, mate, thanks for coming on. Thanks for being honest. There was some of that stuff about your health that I wasn't aware of, and it's been a privilege to listen to your journey, and I loved all that Tasmanian stuff. And I think the audience will love it, but I think the Tasmanian audience will really be attracted to what you've had to say.
Yeah, thanks, Howie. I've lived a fortunate life. I've had people look after me and give me opportunities, and I'm still here to tell the tale, mate, so I'm very grateful.
Good on you, mate. Good luck with everything moving forward.
Thanks, mate.